never ones to do the bare minimum, we also added a due date to things. If you don't know where to start at the beginning. If this overwhelmed you in any way to think about, you know how to add another field. You know how to make an input that does something, right? Because we just got through doing it. So, even if you don't see the whole big picture, just start somewhere. So who did this and feels good about their solution? All right, Mr. McGuarley. Where do I start? Okay, so over in thing component. Okay, and the thing component in our JSX down here. Add another input. We'll put it above our actions, like our delete button. So right after the content editable. Let's put in another input. He said of type date, just like the big fat hint said. Okay, let's just check that. See what that looks like. Look at that. We got a little calendar widget. Isn't that cute? Neat. In browsers that don't support that or that don't have a fancy widget, that'll just be a text box. So it does fall back to something reasonable. Who else? Who else did this and feels good about it? All right, Clayton Lewis. Where do I go next?
We can go into app.js and add a due date to each of the things.
All right. So all new things have a due date. We have ID, name, completed. Now let's put a due date. I'm going to call it due on. This is just a naming convention I like to follow, where if it's a date, I name it on so that it kind of says like due on May 25th, 2017. The 40th anniversary of Star Wars. So what did you set it to initially?
Set it null.
Null. You could do null, you could do an empty string. Whatever. Let's see what null. Null didn't cause you any problems. Okay. So now we have a new property. Who else has got it? Nick? What do I do next? I have a check, or I have a date field. I have a property on my thing. Okay. So yeah, here's that one-way binding again. We're going to make sure that the value that's in the input reflects the current value from that prop. Now, just like on the checkbox, there was a default checked. There's also a default value on text inputs and text-like inputs. So instead of using value, let's use default value. Just a little safer with things that are under React's control. Default value equals, and I have my thing in a local variable already, so I don't have to say this dot props in this case. I just say thing dot do on. Okay, so if I do have a value up in Firebase, it should be reflected. Let's test that. Let's go manually set one. So Jeff here, let's add a date. Let's say due on value 1977, 40 years ago, May 25. Let's go back. I don't see it. Let's try a refresh. There it is. Okay. Hadn't yet synced. There it is. Cool. But if I change it, it's not going to save yet, right? So Alex H again. What do you think I'm going to do, since you seem to be an expert on the subject, to make something happen when I change this field? It's the same answer as last time I called on you. Yeah. So let's put an on change there. And what'd you do, Nick? Did you make a new method? So what'd that new method look like? An awful lot like these other two? An awful lot like it, right? I'm starting to get some repetition, and I don't like repetition. So let's talk about the dry principle. Dry stands for don't repeat yourself. It's the opposite of wet. Write everything twice. Or we enjoy typing. We like to keep it dry. And no, I didn't make those up like that. Like people actually say, like you'll get in a code review and someone will be like, I don't know, man, doesn't feel very dry. Let's dry this thing up. So, although it's a cute acronym, it is something that people actually say. Not just dorks like me. Other dorks too. So we have update name, but I think we could make that handle more cases than just name with just a few minor alterations. So I'm going to give it a more generic name. I'm going to call it handle change. And before I forget, I'm going to update my reference to it down here. So content editable on change is currently update name. Let's make that call handle change. And right now, this method will work great for name. In order to make this method also handle changes to the due date, what would have to change? I don't necessarily expect you to know what we would change it to, but what inside that handle change method could not stay the same? Pari? So I want to take this method and make it work on fields other than name. So which parts are specific to the name field? Which parts would I have to change? Yeah, thing.name couldn't be thing.name anymore, right? It'd have to be thing something else. So the question is, how do we figure out the name of the field that we want to update? We were conferring right before class started to try to think of some other ways other than the way we did it this morning. We came up with a different way that I kind of like, but we'll just do it the same way we did this morning for simplicity's sake. So when we were doing plain old HTML and JavaScript without React, we would usually give our inputs a name, right? A name attribute. So we could do that. We could give this a name. This is my content editable, a name of name. And we could give this date field a name of due on. Then we could try to grab that up here inside handle change. So I'm going to throw, my on change here doesn't say handle change yet, so this dot handle change. So now we have two events calling the same event handler. I'm going to throw a debugger right inside handle change. And let's change something. Skippy. All right. Let's look at ev.target. ev.target is an object with the value of Skippy. Current target is the actual content editable. So knowing that, I could try ev.currentTarget. I could try .name. Not going to work. I could try getAttribute. Pass it the string name. And it gives me back name. So that seems like a reasonable way to do it. If you're not sure, try something out in the console. Always a good method. So we get our props. Then I'm going to make a new variable called field or field name or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to set it to event current target, get attribute name. So now that I have the name of the field stored in a variable, Pari already told us on line 17 what we need to change is the dot name part. What do we change dot name to? Sam 9000. We know that dot name is the part that won't work if it's something other than name. And now our field variable there holds the name of the field that we do want to change. So what do I change dot name to? Pass? What do you say, Taranth? Okay, so you know that what you want to put there is whatever the value of that field variable is, right? But you know what you can't do, right? You can't use dot, right? Because then it'll actually look for a property named field. So what's the other way that we access? That's right. Bracket. Does the same thing as dot. So we had dot name, and we could have the whole time been saying square bracket the string name, because those property names are really just strings. So we could have done that. Same thing. Every single place that we use a dot, we could be using square brackets with a string. But since we don't actually have that value, we only have it in a variable, we have to use square brackets. So if field happens to equal, I don't know, paint chips, it'd be the same thing as writing thing.paintchips. Thing square bracket field. Don't eat them, kids. Get it? Good. Do it work? Let's change great value here. Great value. Refresh the page. It's stuck. Skippy. We're going to definitely need to have some Skippy by June 22nd. Refresh the page. June 22nd, still there. So our task was to make the date field actually persist. And we did it without adding a new method. We just changed an existing method. We barely even had to change it. So should there be a different approach to saving these things sometime later? We only have one method that we need to update. When you have two very, very similar processes that you're doing, ask yourself, what are the specific differences and how could I abstract that thing out? In this case, truly, there was one tiny little thing in that entire method that needed to change. Dot name. So that's a good candidate for refactoring to handle more than one scenario. Good job, team. Look how many people contributed to that. Warms my cold black heart.